There's this fundamental challenge for people with epilepsy and for their doctors, too. It sounds simple, but it's actually incredibly hard. Knowing exactly how often seizures are happening.
It really is. You'd think just count them, right?
Exactly. But relying on memory, or maybe a diary someone keeps, our source material makes it clear pretty quickly that, well, that approach has some major limitations.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Subjective reporting, like those diaries, they're often unreliable. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's inherently difficult.
How so?
Well, think about it. Some seizures are subtle. Maybe the person doesn't even realize it happened fully, or they happen during sleep, or the seizure itself affects memory right afterwards. How can you reliably record every single event?
That makes sense. And the source material, it specifically points out this is a big issue for certain groups, right? Like people with intellectual disabilities, where reporting might be even tougher.
Precisely. And this isn't just, an academic problem. It matters hugely for treatment.
Right, because if you don't know the real frequency, how do you manage things? Like medications, adjusting doses.
Exactly. Or evaluating if a treatment is even working properly, or deciding if someone needs more support, like supervision at night, perhaps. All these crucial clinical decisions hinge on having an accurate count. An unreliable number means you're potentially flying blind.
So this obvious gap,
Yeah.
how do we fix it? And this is where our deep dive into the source material gets really, really interesting today. We're looking at a clinical trial that's tackling this exact problem using technology.
It's called the ERLU study. That stands for Home Ultra Long-Term EEG Monitoring for Rare Epilepsies and Developmental and Epileptic Encephalopathies. Quite a mouthful.
Yeah, but the key part is home ultra long-term EEG monitoring. You can find the details on clinicaltrials.gov. The ID is NCT0685901 if you want to look it up yourself.
And the core idea, the mission of this study, it's pretty straightforward, but potentially revolutionary. Use a wearable EEG device, one that's minimally invasive, to monitor brain activity continuously for a very long time while people are just living their normal lives at home.
Okay, wearable EEG sounds familiar, but this study uses something specific, right? sEEG.
That's right, subcutaneous EEG. So the electrodes, the sensors, they're actually implanted just beneath the skin.
Wow, okay. Subcutaneous. That does sound a bit sci-fi.
A little, maybe.
Mm.
But the aim is to get really robust, continuous data over weeks or even months, not just the hours or maybe days you might get in a hospital setting.
So you get a picture of seizures in the real world, not just the clinic.
Exactly. The goal is a more precise, patient-centered way to manage epilepsy based on what's actually happening day to day.
And the study itself, how's it structured? The source calls it an open-label, non-pharmacological interventional prospective study. Let's unpack that a bit.
Okay, so open label means both the researchers and participants know what the intervention is. There's no placebo device here.
Yeah.
Non-pharmacological means they're testing the device, the monitoring method, not a new drug.
Got it. And interventional perspective just means they're actively introducing the device and following people forward in time to see what happens. With a single group, everyone gets the sEEG.
Correct. It's all about evaluating this monitoring approach itself.
So who's actually in this study? Who are they recruiting?
The criteria are pretty specific according to the source. Participants need to be 12 years or older. They generally have drug-resistant seizures, meaning meds haven't fully controlled them, or specific conditions like rare epilepsies or these developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, DEE.
Okay.
And crucially, they need to have already been well evaluated, usually in specialized clinics or epilepsy monitoring units, so their seizure types are already known and characterized. This isn't for initial diagnosis, it's for better management of known, difficult-to-treat epilepsy.
So focusing on people where getting that accurate count is probably most needed.
That seems to be the idea.
What about who isn't eligible? Sometimes the exclusion criteria are just as revealing.
They are. The source lists quite a few. No major uncontrolled psychiatric disorders, for instance.
Yeah.
No active infections or skin problems right where the implant would go. Obviously, people at high risk for surgery complications are out.
Makes sense. Anything surprising?
Well, maybe a couple of things.
Mhm.
People with certain other implanted electrical devices nearby, like cochlear implants, are excluded. Presumably that's an interference concern.
Oh, okay.
And this one's interesting activities with a high risk of trauma to the device area, like martial arts, are mentioned specifically.
Okay, so no sparring with your subcutaneous EEG.
Apparently not.
Yeah,
Also, you need to be able to actually operate the recording device or have a caregiver who can help manage it. And pregnancy is an exclusion too.
Right, so it really highlights who this is designed for. People with specific, challenging epilepsy types, where the benefit of objective data outweighs the procedural aspects, and where it's safe and practical to implement.
Exactly. And the study itself unfolds in two main parts. Part one is all about calibration, and it happens in the hospital.
Okay, tell us about that.
So first, the sEEG electrodes are implanted. It's described as minimally invasive. Then, the participant is admitted to an epilepsy monitoring unit, an EMU.
That's the standard hospital setup with continuous video and scalp EEG monitoring.
Precisely. They stay there for anywhere from 2 days up to about 2 weeks.
And the purpose of this hospital, stay with the new sEEG already implanted.
Validation. This is critical. They're recording data from the new sEEG device at the same time as they're recording with the gold standard video EEG.
Ah, so a direct comparison.
Exactly. They want to see how well the sEEG performs. Does it detect the seizures confirmed by the video EEG? What's its sensitivity? Does it generate false positives, false negatives? They're really testing its accuracy against the best current method.
And safety too, presumably. Short-term safety.
Yes, short-term safety is monitored closely during this phase. And they also start testing the automated seizure detection algorithm with this initial high-quality verified data set.
Okay. And you mentioned something about blinding earlier.
Yes, very important. The clinical experts who review the sEEG data during this validation phase, they are blinded. They don't get to see the video EEG results simultaneously.
So they're judging the sEEG purely on its own signals, no peeking at the answer key.
Exactly. It ensures the performance assessment is objective.
Right, that rigor is key. Okay, so once the sEEG is calibrated and validated in the hospital, then comes part two.
Then comes part two, the home monitoring phase. This is the real core of the study, testing the device out in the wild, so to speak.
Out in the wild, living everyday life. For how long?
Participants go home with the device implanted and operational for at least 12 weeks. And there's an option to extend that monitoring period up to 24 weeks.
24 weeks? That's potentially half a year of continuous brain activity monitoring at home. That's quite something.
It's a huge amount of data potential.
Yeah.
Far beyond what's typically possible.
So during those months at home, what exactly are they tracking?
Several things in parallel. First, obviously, the sEEG data itself is being continuously recorded. The device also tracks when it's being used, log-in usage times.
Okay, the raw brainwaves.
Second, the participant, or their caregiver, keeps a seizure diary, just like before, noting down any events they perceive, time, date, what happened.
Ah, so they keep the subjective diary going.
Yes, and that's crucial for the comparison later. The source notes that these diary entries are then carefully reviewed and classified by an experienced epileptologist. They try to determine if the described event was likely epileptic or not, and what type it might have been based on the description.
Got it. Objective EEG, subjective diary. Anything else?
Yes, the third stream is safety data. They systematically collect information on any adverse device effects, or ADEs, any unintended potentially harmful effect related to the device itself or the implantation procedure.
Okay, so we've got this flood of data coming in. Continuous EEG, the person's own log, and safety checks. How on earth do they process all of that, especially the EEG data?
Yeah, crunching that much long-term EEG data is definitely a challenge. The force describes a multi-layered approach. First, there's a visual review.
By humans?
Yes. Trained neurophysiology technicians review the raw sEEG data, usually on a weekly basis. They're scanning for patterns that look like seizures.
Okay.
Their findings, any potential seizures they flag, are then validated by an expert clinical neurophysiologist, like an epileptologist. But here's the key again. During this visual review, both the technicians and the experts are blinded.
Blinded to what this time?
They're blinded to the patient's seizure diary. They don't know what the patient reported happening when they're looking at the waveforms.
Ah, okay. So the human EEG readers are judging purely based on the electrical signals. What about the automated side? You mentioned an algorithm.
Right. In parallel to the human review, there's an automated detection algorithm running. It analyzes the same sEEG data completely independently, looking for seizure signatures based on its programming.
So the computer takes its own pass at the beta.
Exactly. And then the results from that algorithm are also reviewed by investigators. But these investigators are blinded to the results of the human visual analysis.
Wow, okay, so multiple layers of blinding. You've got the diary, you've got the human EEG readers blinded to the diary, and you've got the algorithm results reviewed by people blinded to what the human readers found.
Precisely. And this is where it gets, as you said earlier, really fun in a data nerd kind of way.
Yeah.
You end up with 3 different measures of seizure frequency for the same period. what the patient reported, what the human experts found by looking at the sEEG, and what the algorithm found in the sEEG.
And comparing those three, that must be incredibly insightful.
That's the goal, to objectively see where the discrepancies lie. How much does the diary underreport or misinterpret events? How well does the algorithm perform compared to expert visual review? It lets you quantify the value and limitations of each approach.
That comparison feels like the real payoff here. It's not just can we record EEG at home, it's what does that recording tell us compared to what we thought we knew.
Exactly. And alongside all this data crunching, they are, of course, rigorously tracking the safety and tolerability aspect we mentioned.
Right, the ADEs, even though it's minimally invasive, procedures aren't risk-free.
Absolutely not. Safety is paramount. They collect reports of any issues from the participants or their diaries. These ADEs are then classified carefully mild, moderate, or severe, and they determine if any are serious, meaning they require hospitalization, are life-threatening, or cause significant disability.
Does the source list the kinds of things they're looking out for?
It does. It gives a specific list of potential ADEs, things like hematoma, which is like a deep bruise, or collection of blood, or seroma, which is fluid buildup under the skin, pain or headache, obviously, risk of infection at the implant site, general discomfort. There's also mention of potential skin issues if the device causes pressure, like ischemia or reduced blood flow, or even necrosis, which is tissue damage, plus swelling, soreness, irritation, or itching around the device.
Okay, so they're being very thorough in tracking the downsides, too. It grounds the cool tech in the reality of the patient experience.
It has to. For any new approach to be adopted, the benefits need to clearly outweigh risks and burdens.
So let's zoom out then. Assuming this works well and the safety profile is acceptable, what's the potential impact? What does gathering all this objective, long-term, real-world data actually mean for people with epilepsy? So what does this all mean?
Well, connecting those dots, the potential is pretty significant. First and foremost, it gives you that objective measure of seizure frequency. You can finally compare the diary count to the sEEG count and see the reality.
Quantify that suspected underreporting.
Exactly. Get a real number on it. And knowing that actual frequency, that directly impacts treatment decisions.
Right, like adjusting medications.
Precisely. You can make changes to anti-seizure meds and then objectively see if they're working better, worse, or the same based on the sEEG data, not just hoping the diary changes. It can take a lot of the guesswork out of finding the right treatment plan.
That makes sense. And you mentioned earlier about patterns, circadian rhythms and things. That sounded really interesting.
Yes, that's another potentially powerful outcome. Analyzing months of continuous data lets you see if seizures tend to cluster at certain times of day that's circadian, or maybe follow other cycles, ultradian patterns occurring more than once a day.
And knowing when seizures are more likely.
Allows for truly personalized safety plans. Imagine knowing someone is at significantly higher risk between, say, 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. That could inform specific precautions, caregiver awareness, maybe even timing of certain medications. It's about proactive management based on the individual's objective patterns.
That feels much more targeted than just general precautions. And what about the need for support? If the device reveals way more seizures than anyone realized.
That's another key point. If the sEEG shows a much higher frequency, especially seizures the person wasn't aware of, like nocturnal ones, it provides objective evidence that maybe more support is needed.
Like supervision or changes to make the living environment safer.
Exactly, especially for people living alone or those with cognitive challenges. It helps make the case for necessary support based on data, not just estimation. The ultimate aim, as the source material really emphasizes, is to improve quality of life.
How so?
By enabling more effective disease management to happen primarily at home, minimizing hospital stays, and tailoring treatments much more precisely based on what's actually happening in the person's brain during their everyday life. It's about using objective, real-world data for better, more personalized care.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then. We started with this fundamental problem. Just how do you accurately count seizures? It's harder than it sounds.
Much harder.
And this Meyer study we looked at offers a potential solution using this minimally invasive sEEG technology for ultra-long-term monitoring right in the person's home.
It's a fascinating attempt to move beyond those often unreliable subjective diaries and get objective data that can be surprisingly precise and really valuable for management.
It's really about getting a clearer, quantified picture of the true burden of epilepsy, revealing frequency and patterns we just couldn't see reliably before.
Augmenting, maybe even eventually shifting, how we assess seizure severity and treatment response.
And that brings us to a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. If this kind of technology proves successful getting detailed, objective, continuous brain data from someone living their normal life for months, where else could this go?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
What other neurological conditions, what other questions about brain function or dysfunction could benefit from similar long-term real-world monitoring? Think about things like, I don't know, migraine patterns, maybe sleep disorders like apnea, or even tracking subtle changes in movement disorders. What could we learn if we could watch brain activity unobtrusively for extended periods?
It definitely opens up some intriguing possibilities for the future of neurology and patient care.
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the EMIO trial and the quest for objective seizure monitoring. We hope it gave you some interesting things to consider.